You can support In the Past Lane by telling your friends about the podcast. Studies show that one of the top ways that people find new podcasts is by word of mouth. So please, talk it up. Thanks.
Whoa, hit the brakes. You've arrived at the #1 drive-by for American history. Welcome to The Pit Stop. Brought to you by In the Past Lane, the podcast about history and why it matters. Here's Edward T. O'Donnell, your host and historian at large.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Pit Stop, your Monday source for history on the go in just about 5 minutes. If you're new to the podcast, we offer this mini feature every Monday, in addition to our full feature episodes. Like next week's episode where I speak to historian Kevin Levin about his new book, The Search for Black Confederates. Here's what happened in American history the week of September 2nd, 2019. Let's start with birthdays. September 2nd, 1839, 180 years ago this week, that's the birthday of social reformer Henry George, who was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Henry George was a self-taught political economist who, in the 1870s, became distressed by the widespread poverty he saw across America, despite an unprecedented boom of industrial output and the emergence of multimillionaires like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. So, he wrote a book titled Progress and Poverty that became a bestseller and is still in print today in more than 20 languages. In this book, George argued 3 things about economic inequality. First, that it was caused by monopoly. Second, if it wasn't stopped, inequality would destroy American democracy. And third, the solution was the elimination of all taxes except a single tax on land values. Henry George's single tax never caught on, but his stark diagnosis of the threat that extreme inequality posed to democracy made him and his book immensely influential in the Gilded Age and beyond. And if you want to know more about Henry George, this historian has written a book about him. September 4th, 1908, writer Richard Wright was born in Roxie, Mississippi. Wright was a prolific writer whose works focused on the plight of African Americans in Jim Crow America. His 2 most significant works were the novel, Native Son, published in 1941, and his memoir, Black Boy, published in 1945. Richard Wright once wrote, "I knew that I lived in a country in which the aspirations of black people were limited, marked off. Yet I felt I had to go somewhere and do something to redeem my being alive." September 6, 1860, social reformer Jane Addams was born in Cedarville, Illinois. Addams pioneered the settlement house movement in the United States in the late 19th century. In 1889, she established Hull House in a poor neighborhood in Chicago to offer assistance to the poor, mostly immigrant residents in the neighborhood. Hull House soon inspired the establishment of settlement houses across the country, many of which remain in operation today. Jane Addams once said, "The good we secure for ourselves is precarious until it is secured for all and incorporated into our common life." September 6, 1888, Joseph P. Kennedy was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Kennedy was the grandson of Irish immigrants, and he grew up to be a wealthy businessman via Hollywood, Wall Street, and the liquor industry. Kennedy was also politically ambitious, and by the 1930s, he landed several key positions in President Franklin Roosevelt's administration, including serving as ambassador to Great Britain. But his main political legacy came via his sons, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Edward Ted Kennedy. Okay, what about events? September 3rd, 1838, 20-year-old Frederick Douglass, having fled slavery in Maryland, arrived on a ship in New York City as a free man. As Douglass later wrote in his famous autobiography, "I felt like one who had escaped a den of hungry lions." Frederick Douglass would go on to become one of the most important advocates for the abolition of slavery. September 5th, 1882, workers in New York City staged the first Labor Day parade and celebration. In doing so, they had 3 goals. First, to draw attention to the fact that American workers were responsible for the nation's wealth and abundance. Second, that these same American workers were being exploited by greedy employers who forced them to work long hours for starvation wages. And third, that if this exploitation continued and the U.S. became a nation of haves and have-nots, it would mean the end of American democracy. This message and the idea of a Labor Day holiday went viral in the Gilded Age, as workers across the country, from Boston to San Francisco, staged their own celebrations. In 1894, just 12 years after the original event, Labor Day became a federal holiday. September 5th, 1957, writer Jack Kerouac published On the Road, a book that captured the wild, countercultural spirit of the 1950s Beat generation. One of the signature lines of this trippy, zany travel epic reads, "I was halfway across America, at the dividing line between the east of my youth and the west of my future." September 8th, 1900, a massive hurricane made a direct hit on the Texas coastal city of Galveston. In those days, there was no way to identify and track a hurricane, and this one arrived without any warning. Galveston was inundated under a 15-foot storm surge of seawater that destroyed most of the city and killed an estimated 10,000 people. It stands as the deadliest natural disaster in American history. And if you want to know more about it, I highly recommend Eric Larson's book, Isaac's Storm. September 8, 1974, 1 month after President Richard Nixon resigned as President of the United States in the wake of the Watergate scandal, President Gerald Ford announced to the American people that he was pardoning Nixon for any wrongdoing connected to Watergate. Let's just say that this was not a popular decision, and it likely played a role in Ford losing the presidential election in 1976. Okay, time for the last word. Let's give it to the social reformer Henry George, who was born 180 years ago this week. Here's a passage from his famous book, Progress and Poverty, that captures the essence of his warning that rising inequality would destroy American democracy. "In our time, as in times before, creep on the insidious forces that, producing inequality, destroy liberty. It is not enough that men should vote. It is not enough that they should be theoretically equal before the law. They must have liberty to avail themselves of the opportunities and means of life. They must stand on equal terms with reference to the bounty of nature. Either this, or liberty withdraws her light. Either this, or darkness comes on. And the very forces that progress has evolved turn to powers that work destruction." Okay, people, happy Labor Day. That's your history fix for the week. Now put it in Drive and go make your own history.